Welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. This is a platform to showcase people doing great work and talk about hot topics in residence life in college student housing. I'm your guest host today, Stewart Robinette. I use he, him pronouns. After almost 20 years in housing and residence, I recently stepped away to work on some broader learning, talent development, organizational design. However, I've stayed active in the profession, and I'm really excited about today's guests that we're going to be having. Today's guests are going to be focusing on experiences outside of the US. I was very fortunate in my early career with them. And even in my own master's program, I was fortunate to get to have some higher education experiences outside the US that really formed the foundation for how I understood what it meant to be centered on student learning. In that vein, we're going to be speaking to two professionals that I greatly admire and look up to that have had many experiences outside of the continental US and specifically residence life and housing. We're going to be talking to Dr. David Pei and also Dr. Nupur Goyal about their experiences transitioning to and working in countries outside the continental US. So to start things off, I wanted to kick it off to both of you all so that you could do a little introduction about.
Sure. I guess I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me, Stewart, today. My name is David Pei. I'm currently the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the NYU Shanghai campus out here in China. I've been with NYU as an institution all throughout my career. So I started in 2004, and I've stayed with them, working in different capacities, first starting off in residential life in the New York campus, and then moving over to Shanghai to take on broader student affairs areas. And so I currently serve as the Chief Student Affairs Officer. And I've been with the university in Shanghai now for 11 going on 12 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And Nupur?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Nupur Goyal. I am the Director for Residential Education, Housing, and University Community Standards at NYU Shanghai. I've been here for 4 years. I'm originally from India. I went to the US to study, did my bachelor's, master's, and PhD in the US. And then the last few years have started my career at NYU, New York, then worked a little bit with NYU Abu Dhabi, and 4 years ago came to NYU Shanghai. So very happy to be here.
Awesome. And I can't wait to learn more about y'all's journeys and share that with our audience today. I guess to start things off, one of the questions that I always had in my mind, especially after I did one of my study abroads, was, what would it be like to actually work, outside the US? And I'm curious, early in your career, and I know these answers may vary, especially with you being from India, Nupur, but early in your career, like when did you first even think about, maybe I could work in higher education in a system that's outside of the US?
So, I mean, my journey started off as a student. I basically went to the US to study as an international student, and just really fell in love with the US system of higher education. I enjoyed the flexibility of curriculum. I enjoyed the campus atmosphere. I got very involved as a student. I was orientation ambassador, RA, president of the International Student Association, and then the dean for international student affairs. Just, put in a good word for the field of higher education administration. I was on my way to being a speech therapist. That was my major in undergrad, and I was going to do it, but something wasn't quite right. And she was a mentor. Her name is Karen Edwards. She's now at Grinnell. And she said, "Why don't you look at, the at higher education administration?" And I clicked on the websites and started reading up about it. And I said, "You know what? This is exactly what I want to do." So from my plans for going to graduate school for speech therapy, changed over and went to Virginia Tech for higher education administration program, and then the rest is history. So so it started from there. and started as a student, and then went on to just becoming my career path.
Fascinating. And David, I know in our past conversations, you grew up in California, and coming to the East Coast for some of your studies was a big leap. But when did you even envision or think that doing higher ed overseas was a possibility?
I definitely did not think I would be out in China for this long. I again grew up in California and LA. I went to UCLA for my undergrad, which was just 20 miles away from home, and so I was definitely under that, much more wanting to be closer to home. I was the first in my family to go to college, and so really going to college in itself was just something foreign. I didn't have anyone to role model or look up to, and again, it was the experiences with my having a great RA and having a great residential life program at UCLA that really gave me sort of the opportunity to find mentors to help me uh, learn more about the profession and start to create my pathway into student affairs and higher education. I decided that I needed to leave LA because, like, all good student affairs professionals, you want to gain those different experiences. And so I decided to, take a chance and fly to the East Coast and did my master's at NYU, in the higher education program there. And NYU's higher education program, there it was nice because they had components where you could go study abroad as part of the program. So you could choose one or two of your classes during maybe the January term or the summer term. And so I took that chance, an opportunity, and did a class in London for a couple weeks. And that was the first time I had gone out of the country. And so it was the first time that I had ever left the US and left home. And from there, the travel bug sort of kicked in. And in 2008, I had a opportunity to serve as a resident director on Semester at Sea. And so that experience really was the turning point in giving me that sense that the world was bigger outside and that I needed to see it, and that there was something about that force that sort of took me on that journey. And so after I came back from Semester at Sea, NYU started expanding and building their Abu Dhabi campus and having a much more global footprint. And then Shanghai came along, and I said, I'm Chinese American. I was born and raised, but I'm still missing a piece of my own identity. And so coming to China was partially a personal sort of identity development journey, and really trying to get to know myself, but also just wanting to have a very different sort of experience.
It's so powerful hearing how early experiences shaped you all making your decisions before this could be a possibility. I know for me, even getting involved in my studies in international higher education, it was also a study abroad program like you, David, that I had at Ohio State. When we're thinking about a professional, and I'm trying to put myself back in the shoes of some of the professionals that are watching this right now, they're thinking, how could I ever do this? Like, what would it be like? I wanted to tunnel a little bit more into the actual experiences that you've had working with housing and residence life overseas, and think about what was surprising, what's been different, and also what was similar, even surprisingly similar about those experiences. Because for many of our listeners, they maybe haven't had the opportunity to be overseas before, that I think all of us three had before. So any insights on that?
I'll go first, I guess. So the experience in China is definitely different than other places in the world. And so largely because housing and resident life doesn't exist in the form that we're used to from the US. And so it is much more of a place where you just, sleep and eat. And there's not really that emphasis on having RAs and having sort of this aspect of the living learning components that has been widely sort of developed in Western sort of educational institutions. And so you're showing up to a place where you're really building and training people and finding talent within the spaces here, finding people who may be had studied abroad themselves and can put themselves in the shoes of seeing positive experiences as well. And so a lot of the housing and residential experiences that we've sort of built in Shanghai is largely modeled after sort of the US system. And over the last few years, we've had lots of other universities in China come meet with us to learn more about what we've done and start to sort of develop similar type of programs. So, we are still one of the few institutions in China that have RAs and sort of the student leader aspect of that development. But it is starting to grow. Some schools now have residential colleges and have models where they have similar like positions, but largely they're still dependent on full-time professionals to fulfill a lot of the roles with mediation and putting on programming and crisis response and all the good stuff that comes with housing residential program. But it's definitely a shift that we're seeing in the environment here.
I'll add on to that. Even though our housing and residential life program is very much modeled after a US style residential program, it is unique, and this was something for me to learn, like having the most of my work in residence life has been in the US. And so I moved to China 4 years ago, to be the director for residential life. But I'll talk a little bit about the differences. So our student population is is unique in the fact that it's very diverse. So we have about 50% Chinese students and 50% international students on campus. The group of international students also has a lot of diversity within that. So it's a very multicultural group. There is they benefit from all the student support and all the student services that we offer. And of course, there's a little bit of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We need, nice room, get them situated, get them comfortable, and then we move on to programming and things like that. So we have the diversity. We also have the diversity within our student staff, our RA staff, and we embrace that diversity. We want to use that as we want to leverage that rather than just saying like we'll follow the US style and do exactly that. We've actually created an adapted version that leverages the strengths of having Chinese RAs, international RAs from various backgrounds, and the same thing with the staff. We have a lot of our professional staff are majority local Chinese, and then a few international staff members. And so again, we are sort of complementing each other in a lot of ways. It's also one of the most talented staff groups that I've worked with. It's probably my favorite part of the job is just working with a very, very talented, organized, and hardworking team. So those are some differences, and or the better word is adaptation.
I think I wanted to add just another thought too. I think a lot of times the way you select RAs also the way we do it here in Shanghai had to be changed. I think at first when we started, we were applying very similar selection processes that we had seen in the US. And we realized that it just wasn't going to work here because of, again, needing to think about the cultural context in terms of what communication actually looks like, what leadership it looks like, and how it's defined. And so I think oftentimes, schools have used similar models time after time. And, an advice that I would give is as we embrace a larger global population on our campuses, how important it is to really think about, is the processes limiting you from hiring those international RAs that can add to the diversity, or is it that we haven't even considered it? So I think that that's a good first step to really start to change the culture, and how that then allows for your professional staff to then consider or want to potentially work abroad in the future themselves. So that exposure. So how do you create the global exposure within your local context? I think that's an important piece to do as our own commitment to higher education and global higher education.
You know, that's what I've always appreciated about professions, the way that we're always thinking about how we can take things that we're learning or that we've done at our own institutions and apply it more broadly. I guess going a little further into your last comment, David, and Per, and I invite you also to add, are there other from the time that you've been able to spend overseas in these roles that you're now going to be able to kind of take back if you ever do go back to a U.S. institution and really apply it, other than what David just highlighted a second ago, for you, like, you know, this is something that I didn't even think was a possibility or could work, but I saw how it worked here, and this would inform the way that I would want to do something if I went back to one of the institutions on the continental U.S.
I mean, I'm always thinking about ways that I could share this experience, use it to benefit students' services. I read when I was doing my PhD, there was a concept called internationalization at home. So, it's basically, those who are fortunate enough to have the privilege to go abroad and, travel and have that opportunity to go to different places and get that experience. But then we as higher education professionals should be creating opportunities for students on the home campus to get those international experiences without having to travel. So it helps if you have programming that provides, conversations around international topics. It helps to have a diverse student body. It helps to have it helps to have student leaders from a wide variety of backgrounds. So keep thinking about it. And I also think that our personal journeys as professionals are greatly enhanced by exposure to a US style higher education system in a different country. So for me, I'd say the last 4 years have been probably the biggest learning experience and growth experience, other than probably my PhD, just in terms of exposure, in terms of learning, and just the privilege and the opportunity to be in a totally different country, but have the US style education system that I'm very familiar with, to kind of blend in. So all of this, so I highly recommend people to seek out these opportunities, even if they're short term, even if they're or maybe something on your campus that allows you to partner with somebody international. I think it's a very worthwhile professional development.
I think that oftentimes when we do a lot of benchmarking, we look at our peer institutions. And those peer institutions, oftentimes, again, if we're looking at it from a US context, it's generally other US universities. If we're looking at it from a Chinese context, it's in other Chinese universities. Again, I think what I've learned because of being in this joint sort of hybrid sort of both and experience of being both a Chinese university and a US university together is to be able to ask more questions that take into consideration those perspectives. And so when I look at benchmarking or peer institutions, I'm comparing to lots of different places and different countries and different systems of higher education now. And so I'm always saying, well, how is it done here? How is it done in that other place? Because we have students from this other country in large numbers. But if we're only looking at it from both the US perspective or the China perspective, we're then potentially missing out on understanding how to understand their development and how do we integrate that into our larger planning and our larger strategy. And so I think that if I were to go back to the US or any other place to work, that's definitely something that I would carry on because it's so much of my day to day now. It's embedded in my decision making and my thought processes. I never make decisions without having to process sort of how would others perceive that decision to be, and needing to think about it in a lens that I think oftentimes you wouldn't necessarily need to think about in a much more domestic or homogeneous environment.
It's amazing the experiences and how you both are talking about how that would inform you going forward. Even going back to one of your earlier answers that I'm thinking about, David, before you talked about how you got to explore your identity more and how that's impacted you as a professional. I wanted to switch gears a little bit because I know we very much have focused on the work and the job and the profession here, but there's also a certain part of this is your new life when you're living there. Just like when any of us have moved to our first institution or taken a job at another institution. Um, could both share maybe what's your favorite part outside of the work, or maybe work adjacent, since work pervades a lot of what we do. But what's been the favorite part of these experiences for you?
For me, it's definitely the traveling and the access to traveling more. I would say that the way I define myself now is a global urban educator. I'm attracted to big cities. I'm attracted to spaces in which you're seeing a lot of things happening. I always think about my first time in New York City, standing in the metro, in Times Square, during rush hour, and having that moment where I just was seeing people moving in all sorts of directions. And that has been sort of the case as I'm in Shanghai, in any of the busy parts of the city here, or any other parts of China, or standing in Shibuya crossing in Tokyo, or out in Singapore or Thailand. I mean, I have been able to travel to at least 20 or 30 countries in the past 10 years that I don't think I would have done because of the distance. Being able to base myself in China and travel regionally to all these places has definitely been my thing. Granted, I was restricted during COVID, and that's something we won't talk about on this podcast because that's of the past in all our lives. But I definitely would say that that has been my work adjacent, is to, when I can, pick up a bag and jet set off to some other part of the world.
I have a very long answer for this because, as I mentioned earlier, the last 4 years have been the biggest growing, learning, transformative experience for me. So as I mentioned, I grew up in India, went to the US at the age of 18, stayed in the US for a long time, about 15, 16 years. Um, I was at the point where, I'd kind of figured it out. That initial culture shock happened during undergrad, and then I was like, I maybe a little bit of culture shock when I moved to New York in 2005, but I was pretty set. Um, and I really wanted to stay in my comfort zone. Lo and behold, I never imagined that I would move to Shanghai in 2019, but I just did it. And it was, there's a Robin Sharma saying, he wrote the monk who sold his Ferrari, and it's a quote from his book: "The change is hard at the beginning, messy in the middle, and glorious at the end." So I'm nowhere near the end, but it was definitely like how I felt. It was, hard at the beginning, change, and in particular, I don't like change. It was messy in the middle. Again, we won't say the COVID word, but that really got messy in the middle. But I, again, just feel like, uh, if I could encourage anybody listening to step out of their comfort zone and just do it. It is daunting. It is messy, but everything has been a pleasant surprise. The kindness of people, the local people in Shanghai have been just so warm, so kind. I would have never imagined it. One of your questions for the prep was like, what did your family think when you were planning to move? And yeah, my family was like, where are you going? And then add to 2020 January, then they were really like, what are you doing? But I cannot underscore this enough, that it's been the most wonderful experience, the very transformative for me personally, professionally, and just something that I highly recommend. So David's one of those people who likes travel. I I don't have as much wanderlust as he does. I'm very happy with my routine, but now I see the value um, and why it's important as a professional that works with students from around the world, and wants to be able to assess student needs and offer appropriate student services. It's really important to give yourself that exposure and put yourself in those. The other thing I'll say is that I moving to Shanghai really gave me an insight to what a student feels like when they move to a new campus. And I'd kind of forgotten that since my student days. So doing like I was like, oh my God, I know what you go through as a student that would be here, like the adjustment, the getting comfortable with the language, a new place. So it was a really nice, like 15 years into my career, nice opportunity to go back to and refamiliarize myself with those feelings and that transition and that journey. So
I'm gonna add, I had a big smile on my face because I thought Nupur and I were gonna each, I think, assumed the other was gonna talk about yoga, and I think that that was something that I do want to add, primarily because I know that this is a hard profession, and I know that burnout and all the things that we have to deal with and the crises and the after all calls, we're always on, and so as student affairs professionals, as much as you tell people, here are my office hours, or this is when I'm supposed to be working, people don't see that. It's hard for people to draw the line, and you have to find a way to draw that line. And so for me, I did I was working on my dissertation, and I was just hitting such a rut, and sort of a low place, and I just needed, I was having doubts that I could ever finish my doctorate. And so I ended up walking into a yoga studio, met a really great yoga teacher, and just started coming every, at first, 2 or 3 times a week, just to sort of escape and just have a place to just unwind. And then, again, not to mention the C word, during that period of time where things were even harder on the work, I needed a place to be able to put my phone away, and not have to answer. And as someone who is serving in a leadership position, I'm literally on all the time. And so, I yoga became my escape because it was the only time in a day where I could put my phone away for 2 hours. And if people called and they couldn't get in touch with me, they knew, oh, David's most likely in yoga, so we'll call the next person instead. And so, I was able to then use that as a space to, one, disconnect myself, to give me my space that I needed. I know it's in my personality, to want to be helpful. I think, and it's all in our personalities. That's why we chose higher education. We chose the one field where you're not going to be making glorious money, to go, do the things that you want, compared to some of most likely your friends in finance or IT or some of these other fields and whatnot. But the benefit of higher education needs to get balanced as well. And so I think that that's super, super important to everybody, in this profession. Find something that's going to let you shut off that phone, and have a blast with it.
So many amazing insights that you're both giving right now, and going even into self-care, we could talk so much about that aspect too. We are getting to the close of our podcast, but I can't leave this podcast without giving a second for both of you all as mentors that I see you. And I know people have asked you about this, but what would you say to a professional that is coming to you to speak to you about your experiences, and how do I do this? How do I get past the obstacles? How do I make this jump to actually say, I can do this, I want to do this, and then put that ideal into place to be able to work outside the US in housing and residence life?
So there's a lot of universities, joint collaborations across various parts of the world, and staff that, from the US or different parts of the world that are working internationally. So just so you know, there's communities. You can connect with ACPA, has a commission for global student development. And I believe there's a counterpart in NASPA and other, large professional organizations to just network and meet people. And I actually, met some of the staff when I started working, just as a way to connect. And it's in addition to higher education, there's also like school teachers and lots of education professionals around the world. So if you want to do it, there's tons of opportunities around the world actually. It takes a little bit of research online and then do some networking and connect with people. And it's there's the actual process differs country to country. It's a little bit of paperwork, I will admit, and sometimes takes a good amount of time. It could take like up to 3 months for your visa to get processed, and so you do have to work a little ahead of schedule, because the transition can take time. But I highly recommend it, and just my international work has been in Shanghai, but I've met people from the Middle East, from all parts of Europe, from other countries in Asia. So tons of opportunities.
I would recommend that you first start off at your own institution in terms of learning about what is the global footprint of your university and where they may have collaborations or opportunities. That's definitely a first step. Many of your universities will most likely have some sort of study abroad exchange program with another university in another country. It doesn't have to be China. I know for the two of us that we're talking, we've been very Shanghai or China specific, but schools and universities have these exchanges throughout the world. And so you sort of need to either, pin your, blindfold yourself and stick a pin to a map to see where you're gonna go, or spin the globe and see where your finger lands, and then you pick a place and you start there, and then as you look at your own career, if your university doesn't offer an opportunity, it may mean that when you are ready for your next job search, that you're going to align yourself to a university that has that opportunity or that experience. And so, when I came to Shanghai, it was actually only supposed to have been a 3-month assignment. There's an opportunity back in 2012 that says, we're starting things. We need someone with a background like yours where you could speak Chinese and understand student affairs, and we just need you to go set things up a little bit. And that turned into a year, and a year turned into 3, and 3 turned into 6, 6 turned to 9, and now I'm going on 12. So again, it was definitely not something I had anticipated, but it doesn't mean that you have to look so far in advance. You definitely, would want to think about it being at least a commitment for a year or two at the start, because that's the easiest. Because if you think about it too short or you think about too long, I think you start to give yourself some cold feet in terms of that decision process. But once you start actually spending more time learning about higher education abroad, even from the colleagues in your institution, you'll get a good beginning. I think that was the piece that I learned the most was, the reason why I came was because another colleague actually passed on the opportunity. And so, it's the same time, sometimes it's right time, right place, right moment. Nupur and I were having a conversation in, I think, 2018 or something. I said, Nupur, I've asked you to come to Shanghai for years now, and you've said no to me 3 times already, but this time I'm saying, come apply. I have an opening for a position that I think is the right fit for you, and she did it. And so again, it's keeping these networks and relationships strong with the people around you. It's a small community. Generally, people working in abroad generally know each other because again, you have shared goals in that sense. But there's lots of opportunities. You could also volunteer with your schools to take people on abroad trips to just get more exposure to those as sort of alternative breaks trips start up. So just again, you need to just get yourself into that space. And once you go from there, you just don't know which door will open next.
I can't think of a better place to end than the advice that both David and Nupur shared there. What I find really motivating and invigorating from it is that there is a process to be able to do it, but that's like with anything. But you just have to keep your eyes and ears open for the opportunities and take advantage of it when it comes. And those opportunities do come. Don't be scared, and don't potentially miss one of those opportunities. But we're getting near the end of our time. It's a perfect place to end. I want to really take a moment to thank both her for chatting with us today about their experiences, sharing their advice, sharing how it's changed them and how they believe that they are able to make the profession better because of it. I have some things to reflect on now, and I'm sure that those that are listening will also be reflecting on many of the comments made today. I also want to take a moment to thank Roompact for giving me an opportunity to guest host this edition. And finally, I want to thank all of you all that are listening out there. Thanks for joining us on this episode of ResEdChat. If you have an idea of a topic or a person that you'd like to have on the show or hear more about, please feel free to reach out to us at Roompact, and we will make sure to see how we can get that on here. Have a great day, everybody, or night or morning, wherever you may be.